Hello, my name is Janesko.
And I am Palak Maniani, and we go to Elko High School.
And today we are at my home to interview my father, Robert Janesko Sr., and conduct an interview on his past experiences as a naval petty officer.
He served in the Navy for a total of 10 years, being given multiple tasks and titles as he was on duty.
Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule, Dad, to conduct the interview.
My pleasure.
Mr. Robert Janesko Sr. enlisted in the Navy on June 24, 1982, and because of executive orders regarding the military, he returned home on June 24, 1986. After 3 years, he re-enlisted on September 9, 1989, and permanently, for the second time, he retired from the Navy on September 9, 1995.
Mr. Janesko was involved in many conflicts while on duty and was honored with numerous medals and ribbons to thank him for his service. He was born on September 29, 1964, in Lebanon, Pennsylvania. His mother was a financial business manager, and his father was a postman. He was an only child, and according to Mr. Janesko, he was a spoiled child.
Before entering the military, Mr. Janesko was a high school student. Mr. Janesko signed up for the military program in high school called the Delay Entry Program, where he was seeking an opportunity to see the world.
Right when Mr. Janesko graduated from high school, he went to boot camp in June. He recalls his instructors. They were both former Marines, so they were very hard on you. If you messed up, they could get physical with you. One of the toughest skills for Mr. Janesko to acquire was the physical aspect. In a program called Physical Security Specialists in the Lackland Air Force Base, where Mr. Janesko trained, he did encounter some problems. He was smaller in stature, so taking on guys bigger than him was an extensive challenge for him. Boot camp was when Mr. Janesko was taught proper attire for the military. He recalls how their shoes had to be shined and clothing had to be ironed each day.
Which again is one of the things I really took from the military, was discipline. And even to this day, if I wear a button-down shirt, I make sure it's a straight line. We used to call it our gig line. Make sure it's a straight line all the way down with my belt buckle and everything. I still do that to this day.
After boot camp, Mr. Janesko went to Basic Electricity and Electronics School in Orlando, Florida. Initially, he wanted to be a nuclear electrician's mate. However, after encountering some bitter experiences with the program and the people, he decided to take a different path in the military. After a series of events, he was sent out to the fleet, entitled a non-designated striker. This meant that he did not obtain a specific job, so he ended up going to Engineering Department A-Gang. There, he attained the knowledge of diesel engines, air compressors, and power generators. He called the experience of learning very enriching.
For about 6 to 8 months, Mr. Janesko went to a school in Little Creek, Virginia, called the Little Creek Amphibious Base. There, he learned how to drive small crafts, also known as Zodiacs or rib boats. Those were boats that Mr. Janesko drove for the Navy SEALs.
Mr. Janesko was sent out on a ship. There, he learned various trades. His first ship was the USS Stephen W. Groves. It was a guided missile frigate and was not designed to cross the Atlantic Ocean. However, Mr. Janesko was able to travel down to the Caribbean, Central America, North and South America, and the ship crossed the Atlantic Ocean 4 times. The ships were titled as suicide boats because of their radar signals. They were usually the first target by the enemy.
Being asked, Mr. Janesko explains how surprised he was when he found out he was driving for the Navy SEALs.
Because those guys are, say what you want, the baddest-ass man on the planet. I mean, there's no other way to put that. I have nothing but mad respect for them because I've seen what they went through firsthand. They're a really good group of guys. I mean, they really are. They're something else. They're absolutely incredible.
On the boat, Mr. Janesko was assigned to various tasks. He was in charge of Water King, which is taking salt water from the ocean into distillers to convert into fresh water, and working on diesel engines, air compressors, and oil changes.
See, it's really hard to envision this, but out at sea when the ship's rocking and a helicopter comes in and doesn't quite land, it's called HIFR, Helo in-flight refueling. I have to pop out of the deck with a hatch while a helo's right above me. It's blade spinning, it's not touching the deck, and I have to get a hose up there so they can refuel. And it's more dangerous than people realize because there's a static discharge. They have to release that, otherwise electricity flows, hits the fuel, and boom. So it was pretty dangerous, and we do that at night too, out at sea.
As a petty officer, Mr. Janesko had the burden of responsibilities not only for himself but also his subordinates. Keeping in mind of their well-being, he was to monitor over their work performance, professional development, education, training, morale, and make sure that they maintained standards of behavior.
While fulfilling their tasks was important, Mr. Janesko and other officers on the ship often found things to do as pastime. One of the ships that Mr. Janesko was on, there was a helicopter hangar. When they were empty, they would be used as volleyball or basketball courts. Mr. Janesko states how sometimes it would be a little tough while the boat was rocking back and forth in the ocean. Aside from that, they had punching bags and equipment for working out. On the deck, there were card tournaments such as hearts, spades, euchre, and cribbage. In the last few years in the Navy, someone would bring video games onto the ships. That was when video games first started to come out.
One of the main conflicts that Mr. Janesko participated in was the Gulf War. However, the Navy took minimal action in Operation Desert Storm. After the Navy SEALs had been dropped off to their destinations, the rest stayed back and launched missiles. However, during Operation Desert Shield, the Navy was more involved. Mr. Janesko inspected ships thoroughly to ensure that nothing was on there that didn't belong.
One of the few times that the Navy was directly in a conflict was at the bombing of Beirut. Mr. Janesko happened to be off the coast when the incident occurred. After the bombing, news spread instantly, and Mr. Janesko dropped off the Navy SEALs off the coast and rescued innocents, a couple of doctors, medical staff, and civilians, and brought them out to the ships to safety. He vividly remembers. The bombing of Beirut was one of the most horrific events personally witnessed by him.
But I remember it was very vivid and very distinct. Because like I told you before you looked it up, I remembered the name of the trucks, the type of trucks. They were expecting a water delivery, a water tanker, and they were Mercedes trucks. I believe one was even yellow. It was very vivid because of everything that transpired within a matter of minutes after that. So.
With a lack of technology back then compared to today, communication was a problem for Mr. Janesko. Letters were the primary sources to send word from sea to home, and regular helicopter trips would come from time to time in order to drop off or take in mail. Through a Mars radio, Mr. Janesko could call home if his family used a phone on the other line.
In one incident, Mr. Janesko recalls, "My grandmother died while I was out at sea, doing standard operation. I was supposed to be at the funeral. There was a breakdown in communication, and I didn't make it off the ship in time. He had to be ordered to send home right away by the state's congressman, which made his captain mad because he got yelled by his superior. Out at sea most of the time, it was hard for Mr. Janesko to communicate with his family due to the inefficiency of the progress."
And evidently, my mother had sent word to the Red Cross of this, and I don't know if there was a breakdown in communication or what, but I didn't make it off the ship in time, which caused a lot of concern amongst the family, and my mother in particular. So she contacted our congressman, and he contacted whoever he had to in his channels to get a hold of the captain of our ship, and basically ordered them to get me home immediately. So
Mr. Janesko returned home and was given an extremely heartwarming welcome. When he returned from the long cruise on Long Island, he was one of the first people off the ship. He saw his wife and his little son waiting for him, and instantly he grabbed them. With a lot of news crews there, LA Times, Long Beach edition, took a picture of Mr. Janesko with his son, and they were in front of the LA Times magazine.
it's pretty cool, and it's heartwarming. You can't describe it. It's incredible.
Since serving in the Navy, Mr. Janesko claims that one of his biggest accomplishments is raising a family. He stands by the Navy rules and morals to this day. They have become a part of his everyday life. The military hardened him up and taught him important things such as respect, discipline, and responsibility.
One of the most memorable experiences Mr. Janesko had when he was in the Navy was when he was in Honduras. They had just arrived after a terrible hurricane, and when they went into town, which consisted of only a few buildings, including an orphanage and a church, everything was in ruins. Mr. Janesko and a few of his buddies spent 6 hours rebuilding the place and the roof of the orphanage. This is one of the moments that got lost in his memory, because with the lack of technology, a lot of people were unaware of this event, and it should have been more appreciated. At the time, he was only 19, and he and his friends were looking around, just having fun.
It was nice. I mean, if we had more social media now, it would be more appreciative, because people would be taking pictures and whatnot, but a lot of things like that happen, and they go unappreciated because, it's not as, you don't have the social media nowadays, so you can't see a lot of the stuff that went on back then.
One of the Navy ceremonies that occurred on the ship was to honor the achievement of crossing the Arctic Circle. Even when the temperature was below zero, Mr. Janesko and other subordinates sat out in front of the ship, simply in their socks and underwear, and had a mist of water blown at them. being called a golden shellback, meaning that he crossed the equator twice. Mr. Janesko received a certificate after the ceremonies. Mr. Janesko takes this as a great honor and claims that partaking in this ceremony for him was very prestigious.
Since separating from the military, Mr. Janesko has kept in touch and talked to people that he had met in the Navy. He had gotten a hold of some people from MySpace and Classmates.com, and from there he has talked to a bunch of people, but not too extensively. Being an only child, the guys that Mr. Janesko met were like brothers to him.
I want to see, because you don't know, is it somebody you knew? At the end of the day, that was somebody's son, brother, dad. It hits you later. It hurts.
Well, when you do...
They had bonded well and looked out for one another. Mr. Janesko explains how it was extremely hard for him to witness the destruction and casualties before his eyes because many of them he had known. At the end of the day, they were somebody's son, father, husband, so it was gruesome for Mr. Janesko to look back and remember the details of the post-conflict effects.
There is nothing that Mr. Janesko regrets about the Navy or his decisions. He also believes that people should get out there and see the world. Through the Navy, he was able to experience and see things in life that not many people get to see.